بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله خاتم الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I thank the organizers for inviting me here to speak today on the political biography of Imam Zainul Abidin, peace be upon him. This raises some interesting points which I had hoped to cover in this single discussion, but I don't think it is possible to condense the life of an Imam so rich with vital information for the Shia that we only allow ourselves 20, 30, 40 minutes for speaking. So it is likely that we will again touch upon this topic next time we see each other. I'm here to maybe just bring up some issues and points rather than to give you definitive information, maybe to discuss with you, to engage with you, to bring some important points to light. Because even as some Shia writers authored, the common belief is that Imam Zainul Abidin, after the Battle of Karbala, spent the rest of his life in mourning. That this Imam, every time food was brought to him, his tears would fill the bowl of food. Every time he went out and walked past the butchers and he heard them taking the animals to slaughter, his eyes would fill with tears. And we get an image that this Imam was an Imam constantly in mourning. In a way, a broken man, upset at the loss of his family, that the remainder of his life he dedicated to show the Shia and the non-Shia the suffering of Imam al-Hussein and the lessons from Karbala through mourning. However, this is completely unfair to the Imam. This is something that takes away the great amount of teaching that he did, the great amount of reformation in the society, which actually, as we shall see, was filled with Banu Umayyah's propaganda and Banu Umayyah's stranglehold, even preventing people from recording hadith, preventing people from teaching Islam, preventing people from speaking about the Prophet. If you were to stand and speak good of the Prophet, somebody would inform on you. And you would find yourself taken before the authorities, being questioned. Who gave you the authority to speak? You would say, I'm only repeating some of the fadail of the Holy Prophets. We have not authorized you to speak, they would say. Some people who only spent their time teaching the Quran and narrating various incidences regarding these verses found themselves in trouble. Abdullah bin Abbas, the famous companion. Muawiyah wrote to him and said to him, I hear that you sit in the mosque of the prophets and you give your opinion on the Quran. I prevent you from doing so. So Abdullah bin Abbas wrote back and said, do you prevent us from reciting the Quran? And Muawiyah wrote back and said, no, I do not. He said, then do you prevent us from teaching it and explaining it to people? He said, yes, I do. You may recite the verses as they are, but no more than that. This was the society, or this was the kind of stranglehold the Banu Umayyah had on the people at the time. So for us to just dismiss the Imam's life as a life of mourning, a life of sadness, a life of remembrance of the tragedy of Karbala is wholly unfair to the Imam. So this is an important point. And unfortunately, as I said, some notable Shia scholars and authors also go along this line. I have a quote here. The quote is, I won't mention the author's name, but he's quite prominent. He says, I'm translating from the Arabic, it's the tragedy of the killing of his father, referring to Imam al-Hussein, killing of Imam Zain al-Abidin's father was the most tragic thing in his life. It left him utterly broken. And after that he withdrew from the people. He would not trust anyone. He would not want to befriend anyone. And he did not get involved in any political matters, any societal matters. And he withdrew himself only into worship. This is the language that we would expect from people who are not from the school of the Ahlul Bayt. But unfortunately, many authors repeat these kind of statements, that the Imam withdrew from daily life. The Imam focused only on ibadah. The Imam put all his attention into his ibadah and let society do what it wanted to. This is totally untrue. So inshallah, we are here to give the correct image. That is why we have chosen the title for today's discussion, the political biography of Imam Zain al-Abidin. we need to also get an understanding about the imamah. We'll touch upon this in a while, but we also need to be fair. How difficult must it be for somebody to become an imam? For somebody to have this role, this rank, and to make correct decisions every single time without fault. It is very, very difficult. When we think about the imam, we cannot think what we would do in that situation. We have to think, what was the imam trying to achieve? What was the imam trying to do? Is he there to make value-based judgments? Or is there something higher than this? Does he have a motive behind every action? Is he upset for himself? Does he want to do something because of a reward? Is he trying to make a political gamble by doing something? For example, when the imam stands and speaks before the rulers of the time, before Yazid ibn Muawiyah in Sham, for example, before Ubaydullah bin Ziyad in Kufa, what is the imam thinking there? Is he there to say, look what you have done to my father and that's it? Or is there something more beyond this? We cannot put ourselves in the imam's position. Oh, the imam did this for so-and-so reason. The imam must have done this for so-and-so reason. There is much more beyond this that we, because we are short-sighted, cannot really understand what the infallible was trying to do. So we cannot look at the imam from our perspective. We have to look at the imam as somebody who's divinely inspired, someone who's doing something as if the Prophet himself was doing it. Would the Prophet act like one of us on his own emotions and feelings? No. Divinely inspired, somebody who knew what he was doing was in accordance with what Allah wanted. So this is an issue. And history has not been fair to any of the imams, because as you know, very few people had the chance to write history. Up until the year 150 Hijri, there was no legally authored book. The Prophet died in the year 11 Hijri. The year 150, up until then, no book had been authored legally. You could not write a book and distribute it and publish it. No such thing was allowed. So for 40 years, nobody, neither the state, nor in private, nor an individual, nor a foundation, nor a charity, nor a college, not even the people of Medina, were able to legally write a book and distribute it and publish it. The first book that was authored or legally allowed to be distributed was Al-Muwatta by Imam Malik of the Maliki Madhab. And this was authored on the instructions of Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, the Khalif of the time. It is a book of law, hadith relating specifically to jurisprudence, to fiqh. This was the first time the state allowed something to be published. So you have to look at and say, for 140 years, how did people get by? Did they just recite the Quran, do their salah, do their ibadah, and that's it? What about their questions about theology, about Allah, about justice, about the Prophet himself, about the hereafter? What about the verses of the Quran that need explanation? If teaching was prohibited up until the time of Al-Hasan Basri, so up until the year roughly 90 or 100 Hijri, and no books were allowed until the year 150 onwards, what did the people do in the meantime? The answer is, people fell into errors. People made mistakes. You have creeds like predestination, al-jabr, or fatalism. This is something the state wanted to happen. People started to believe that their deeds were predestined. Things were meant to be as they are. God wills it. God wants it. So when Yazid kills Imam al-Hussein, it is because God wanted it this way. When Yazid orders the attack on Medina, it is because God wants it. Yazid didn't do it. These are God's actions. This is God's hand above all things. God commands these things. God orders these things. God destines these things. And for Banu Umayyah, this was an excellent ideology. Fantastic. Because whatever wrong the Khalifa did, it's not my wrong, it's God's wrong. God wills it. And so people formed a whole school out of this. And then you have a creed like that of the Murji'ah, which says that whatever bad you do now, you will not have a judgment placed upon you. For now, you're still a Muslim, you're still a mu'min. In the hereafter, there will be a judgment. But for now, we'll still call you a Muslim. In some schools, we'll still call you a mu'min. So if you kill, if you do bad, if you do the greater sins, wal-iyadhu billah, you are still a Muslim. Which goes against some of the very commandments of the Quran. The Quran says if you kill one person, it is as if you have killed the whole people. How can this person still be called a Muslim? And this was again another part of ideology that was supported by Banu Umayyah. So history, if we look at it, cannot have been fair to the Imams who were trying to educate people, who were trying to say, hold on, these ideologies, where have they come from? Are they from the teachings of the Prophets? Are they based on the Sunnah? Can we find these in the Quran? We ask us, the Ahlul Bayt was saying. We have the mention of the name of Amir al-Mu'mineen. It is very difficult for some people. In books, sometimes when they allude to a hadith, and someone said, the hadith says, that someone is Ali ibn Abi Talib. But the people that were writing the hadith did not want to mention his name. Verses in the Quran, specific verses, alhamdulillah, all of us are familiar with the verses concerning the Ahlul Bayt. You will see commentators from many years ago and until today, contemporary ones, when they look at the explanation of the verse, Shawahid al-Tanzil, for example, why this verse was revealed, they will say it was for so-and-so reason, so-and-so battle. Perhaps it was this, perhaps it was that, maybe it meant for him. There is a narration about this. After about 20 explanations, right at the end. And perhaps it could have been revealed about Ali ibn Abi Talib. What are they trying to do here? They do not want the name of the Ahlul Bayt to be prominent. And if we know that history cannot have been written by neutral, non-biased people, then we know the Ahlul Bayt must have suffered terribly in the books of history. Their names have been omitted. False things have been ascribed to them. Their true motives, their true deeds misconstrued. So it is for us, when we look back at history, to understand that some of it is not fair to the Ahlul Bayt. So when someone says that Imam Zayn al-Abidin spent his life in mourning, we need to look and see who was the author of this. Where did he write this? What year was he writing? Imam Zayn al-Abidin died in the year 95 Hijri. This man is writing in the year 400, 500 Hijri. What were his sources? Where is this man from? We need to understand. So we have to be careful when we look at biographies of the Imams, within our school and through other schools as well. The Imams all faced enmity, every single one of them, from Amir al-Mu'mineen salamullahi alayhi up until the time of Al-Hujjah, Ajjallah Farajul Sharif. Every single Imam was faced with enmity. No Imam went through his life peacefully, without having enemies, without jealousy, without political powers trying to harm them, trying to cast doubt on their claim to the Imamah, to the succession of the Prophets. So every single Imam had to live their life on guard all the time. How difficult is this? Imam al-Askari salamullahi alayhi was born in house arrest. The narrations that say he was born in Samarra, he was born in the middle of an encampment surrounded by soldiers, in an army barracks, if we use today's language. This is where the Imam was born, surrounded by soldiers. How difficult must it have been to live in that area at the time? If you go out, you're seen. People come to you, they're seen. Anything that happens, you're seen by all these soldiers standing by, waiting, just to say, oh, he was up to this. Let's go and tell the Khalifa. Constantly surrounded by spies. What kind of a life was this? So the Imams, every single one of them, at one time in their life, had to go through this. Imam Zayn al-Abidin, when he leaves Damascus to go back to Medina, what does he ask for? What does he want from you? Now Yazid has changed his tone. Yazid has realized that bringing them to Damascus was a mistake, because people thought that these rebels were defeated by Yazid, and their entry to Damascus was a day of Eid. It was assigned as a day of Eid. Sahel al-Sa'di, who was one of the few remaining companions of the time, says, I entered Damascus the day that the Ahlul Bayt were brought as prisoners. I did not know it was them, but I saw Damascus as if it was in the same design as the greater Eid, Eid al-Adha. So we can imagine people were celebrating in such a way that he thought it was Eid al-Adha. So I said, do the Ahl al-Sham, do the people of Sham have an Eid that the rest of the Muslims don't know about? They said, yes, O Sahel, in the narration. Don't you know today is a victory for the Muslim Ummah? Why? Because those prisoners are being brought in. I went and I asked, I saw one of the women standing at the front of this group. Who are you? She said, I am Zainab bint Ali. I said, don't you expect the sky to turn on its head? Don't you expect all life to stop any minute now? Do you know who you have brought prisoner into Damascus? So Yazid then found that things turned against him. When he sent back the Imam to Medina, what did the Imam ask for? Now he's in a position where the Khalifa wants to do him favors. What does he ask for? He says, give me the heads of my family to take back with me. And ask your men to return some of the things that they stole from us. Some of them belong to Fatima al-Zahra, salamullah. They were with my father, they were with my grandparents, and I wish for them to remain in our family. Yazid said, the heads I can give you, the rest is lost. So in such a position, we have to understand that the Imams faced enmity. When they had the chance to do something, they did not do it out of personal motive. They did it in obligation to the role of Imamah. What is the role of the Imam? What is the Imam there for? When we say the title of this talk is Political Biography, am I here to say the Imam was a good political leader, the Imam had led a party of so-and-so, he found himself ruling for so-and-so years? Are we here to evaluate his life as a political leader? Like Amir al-Mu'mineen, a good, solid political leader. Is that what we're here for? Is that the job of an Imam, to be a political leader? Someone with authority? No. Political leadership is a means, not an end. Political leadership is something that may serve the Imam, and so the Imam finds himself performing political leadership. But it's not an end. The Imam does not try to become a political leader. The Imam's roles: teach people the sunnah of the prophets, be a guide to the people. When people are going astray, the Imam says, hold on, this is wrong. All the Imams we have in our narrations used to go out to the Hajj 30 times, 35 times, 40 times, sometimes barefoot. Every single one of them. We know they went numerous times to the Hajj. Why? Because they spent all their time in the Hajj telling people, this is not the place you do ihram. It's not over here, it's further down. This is not how you do tawaf. This is not the place where you need to stand for Arafah. Muzdalifah is not over here, it's over there. This is not the way to behave in Hajj. People had forgotten. Amir al-Mu'mineen, salamullah alayhi, I have a quote from Amir al-Mu'mineen here. The quote says that by the time the Imam received the Khilafah, so in the year 36 Hijri, he says, the Imam says, nothing remains. Nothing is remaining from Islam except its name, and from religion except its customs. There's nothing left. Only people are Muslim in name and Muslim in custom. This is from Al-Mas'udi, Muruj al-Dhahab, historian, not from the school of Ahlul Bayt. And he says that this was the time of Ali ibn Abi Talib's Khilafah, that people were Muslim in name only. So the Imam's role is to guide people when they go astray. And the third of these roles is to be an example to people in their akhlaq. An Imam is sent here not only to tell us you're doing bad, but for him to show us he is right, he's the best, he's correct, so we better ourselves. So we look to the Imam and say, that's the way we should behave. That's the way we should be. God is in a way giving us a helping hand. Not just the Quran, not just telling us to worship and pray. He's saying, look, here's a living human being, follow him. You follow him, he's going to better you. Giving us an extra incentive to be better people. So where does political leadership fall in with this idea of the Imam? If political leadership allows him to explain the Sunnah and guide people and to become an example, then this is good. We want political leadership. This is a means to an end. However, if gaining political leadership does not serve any of these three, then there is no point in it. There's no value in it. Which is why we see Imam al-Hasan salamullah alayhi seeking political leadership to serve these aims, and then turning his back on political leadership when it would not serve these aims. He turned his back. Imam al-Hasan was elected as the Khalifa of the people, by the people. Forget that he is the Imam, divinely chosen by Allah. We're talking about political leadership here. The people elected al-Hasan ibn Ali after his father, salamullah alayhi. Yet the Imam, when he saw that political leadership was not serving these interests, he turned his back on it. So when we look at the lives of the Imams, when we mention the words political and leadership and biography, we cannot evaluate it in terms of how many years did he rule, how successful was he, how many battles did he fight, how many did he win, how long was his Khilafah. Imam Ali was a poor Khalifa because he only ruled for 4 years, and the second and third Khalifa ruled for many, many more. They never lost any battles, whereas Ali won one, drew one, and won another. It was a mixed political career. He did not even control the entire Muslim empire. Look at Muawiyah, much better Khalif. These are some of the words of people when they look to evaluate the life of Ali, look from a political perspective only. They forget that his political leadership is there to serve the aims of his imamah. He is an imam before he is a political leader. He is an imam before he is a Khalifa of the Muslims. So this is the priority for an imam. If we look at it from this lens, through this angle, when we come to look at the life of Imam Zain al-Abidin, we will understand, yes, whatever he must have done was serving the imam. So when we say political biography, it doesn't mean just his time spent in power. It means, what did he do for leading the people? Was there a need for him to become a political leader? Did he become a political leader? How did this affect the people of the time? So the evaluation should be through the lens of he is an imam before he is a political leader. This is an important point. After the death of the Prophet and the issue of the failed succession, the failed political succession, we understand why the imams withdrew from political life. Ali ibn Abi Talib salamullahi alayhi turned his back on the political process. More than one time they approached him, and every time he said, I will rule according to the way the Prophet wanted me to rule. Under your conditions, I will not accept. It is more than one time. It is not only after the attempted assassination of the second Khalifa, while he was still ill and appointed the six-man council, and they offered the political leadership to Amir al-Mu'mineen on the conditions that he follows the sunnah of the first and second Shaykh in the narrations. No, the Imam for 25 years and more turned his back on the political process. Not turned his back because he was stubborn or because he was bitter, because he was upset, but because if he tried to engage with the political process, it would damage his role as an Imam. All subsequent Imams, by default, were outside the political process, because the Prophet tried to leave behind an orderly succession, and the people rejected this. And nobody in later generations, very few people maybe, wanted to stay, hold on. It is the right of the Ahlul Bayt to be political leaders of the time, not anybody else. Imam Zain al-Abidin, there is another quote from him. Imam Zain al-Abidin says, there are not so much as 20 men in Medina and Mecca who love us. Bihar al-Anwar, volume 46. He says, in Mecca and Medina, there are not more than 20 people who love us. Not love us that they cry for us, and they smile when they see us, and they're happy for us. Love us that will fight for us, fight for our rights. Love us, that means they will lay down their lives. We have so many companions of the Ahlul Bayt. We have so many companions of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Yet the day his house was attacked, not more than 4 people were there supporting Amir al-Mu'mineen. So many lovers of the Amir, and only 4 really willing to lay down their lives for him. So when we say the rest of the people supported the cause of the Ahlul Bayt, yes, they did. Lots of people did. Lots of people spoke about it. But how many were willing to put down their lives? The Imam saying not more than 20. Imam Zain al-Abidin. So if you say, well, if becoming a political leader will serve the Imamah, why didn't he go out and try to achieve political leadership? How? Imam al-Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet, Sayyid Shabab al-Jannah, by the time he makes his way to Karbala, 70, 80 people with him. He left maybe 1,000 people from Mecca. By the time he ends his journey at Karbala, the night of the 10th, he says, look, tomorrow certainly every single one of you will die. And he repeats this all the way through. By the time the day of the Ashur arrives, 72, some of the narrations say, 72 men died with him. So where are the people that were willing to fight for the Imam's political leadership? They were not there. So we cannot say the Imams did not seek political leadership because they were bitter, they were angry, they were stubborn, they turned their back. No. It was because there was no one there to actually fight for this political leadership. Nor was there any benefit at that time of fighting other people to gain political leadership. Which is what Imam al-Hasan salamullah alayhi. He turned back because people were saying he wants leadership for himself, not to serve the cause of the Imamah. He wants to become a ruler. He seeks this world. And the Imam said, in this case, I will turn away from this. I will show you what my priority in life is. The priority was Imamah. akhlaq, teaching, justice, returning to the sunnah of the Holy Prophet. Umayyad propaganda was very, very strong. However, it suffered because of three notable events during the life of Imam Zayn al-Abidin. The first was the Battle of Karbala, the tragedy of Ashura. This was something that the Banu Umayyah never ever recovered from, because every successive rebellion, revolution, uprising, every single one of them used the story of Ashura either as a pretext or a reason or a cause or a slogan or a uniting factor. Every single revolution after or rebellion after the Battle of Karbala used Karbala to gather people, to remind people of the injustice of Banu Umayyah. So this really hurt Banu Umayyah's image. Number two, the massacre, the tragedy of Al-Harra, the attack on Medina. 3 days Yazid gave allowance to the soldiers to do as they pleased. Imagine you take an army into a city and say for 3 days you're on leave, you can do what you want. Kill, maim, massacre, pillage, loot, rob, do what sets fire, whatever you want to do, do. For 3 days you're allowed to do any single thing that comes to mind. This is exactly what's happened in the city of the Holy Prophet. The mosque of the Holy Prophet became a stable for horses. People would tie their horses, the soldiers would tie their horses next to the burial place of our Holy Prophet, the holiest figure in Islam, and we believe the best of all mankind. Horses were left around his grave, animals, wild animals. It is said that there were 10,000 narrators of the Quran, not narrators, memorizers, not memorizers, teachers of the Quran. 10,000 of them were slaughtered in these 3 days. Imagine how difficult it is to kill 10,000 people. In those days, there were no chemical weapons, no weapons of mass destruction. You press a button, 1 million people die. In those days, physically, you had to get a sword and kill people. How difficult must it have been to kill 10,000 teachers of the Quran? This is what Yazid ibn Muawiyah authorized. This is what Banu Umayyah committed. And this stained their reputation. They could not recover from this, even though modern day authors try to highlight some of the achievements of Banu Umayyah and their rule. This stain cannot be removed. The third, the attack on Mecca itself, the holiest place in all of Islam. The Kaaba was struck down. The Kaaba was destroyed. It has been destroyed in 1996 and rebuilt. The Kaaba that we have today has been destroyed maybe 20, 30 times. Most recently in 96. The one you see today is a new model, new construction. They went in quietly, privately in 1996, and the modern regime ruling over that land, and they destroyed the Kaaba, took it all apart, and threw all its materials in the Red Sea, so that no Muslim would try to take any part of it and glorify it and so on and so forth. And this has been done before, as we say, in the time of Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, who succeeded his father, who succeeded Muawiyah, the son of Yazid, who abdicated, and before him Yazid. The attack on Mecca was unthinkable. If you killed Al-Hussein and you attacked Medina, nobody thought that the very place people turned to for prayer every single day would be attacked. And this is what Banu Umayyah did. So these three incidences during the lifetime of Imam Zayn al-Abidin left a very bad stain. You would expect most people to say, right, surely we cannot have these people as leaders. If the place we turn to, forget Al-Hussein, forget Medina. The Holy Kaaba itself is where you face for prayers. If that very place is being destroyed by the rulers of the time, how can we follow these rulers? You would expect all the Muslim lands to stand up and say, enough is enough. We have, in the year 2000, if I recall correctly, a few protests in the UK. People spontaneously just said, that's it, enough. We're not paying 82 pence for a litre of petrol. Too much. The government takes too much for tax. And people decided to come out and protest. People blocked refineries. Most of you will remember. Over a few pence of the cost of petrol, people were willing to rise up. How come in those days, when the holiest place in Islam is being destroyed, people don't rise up? It is because of the brutality of Banu Umayyah and the strongness or the strength of their propaganda. What was the role of Imam Zain al-Abidin in his time? If we want to categorize the rule of Bani Umayyah, and in his lifetime we will mention 6 areas. Lawlessness. There was no law at that time. Medina became the #1 city to go to if you wish to become a singer. One of the famous scholars, one of the imams of the schools of fiqh, not from our school, the other schools, spent his early life as a singer. It is said then he left singing for fiqh, for jurisprudence, because his mother said to him, you sing well, but your looks, the way you look physically, not good enough to become a singer. Go do something else. And so he turned his attention to fiqh and became a famous jurisprudent. The people of Medina were known as the people with the best voices, not for reciting Quran, for reciting song. The Khulafa would seek out the young boys and girls, and even the grown men and women from Medina to be sent to Damascus. And instead of becoming a city of learning and piety, it became a city of corruption. You can look it up in the history books. Look at Tarikh Ibn al-Kathir, for example. Or Al-Kamil fi Tarikh for Ibn Athir. Or even Al-Tabri alludes to this. The city of Medina became somewhere where lawlessness and corruption was widespread. If somebody dared to stand up and say, this is haram, this is wrong, he would be flogged. He would be imprisoned. He'd find himself in trouble. Anybody stood up to say, this is not what the Prophet wants you to do in his own city, he'd find himself shut out, not allowed to speak anymore, exiled, as some of the famous companions were. So lawlessness, the spread of fake hadith. At that time, people were starving to death, and many people with low morals decided to fabricate hadith for their own advantage. Somebody fabricated hadith that the Prophet said a certain type of vegetable is the healthiest and most loved by Allah. Why? Because he was a vegetable seller himself. And the hadith spread so that he made money from this. And somebody said, so the farmland of so-and-so is the best of all the areas in Hijaz because Allah bestows favors upon it. And the hadith spread. Why? Because so-and-so had a farm there. And this was happening all the time. At the same time as this was happening, authentic hadith was not allowed to be recorded. If you were heard, as in the case of Abdullah bin Abbas, if you were heard reciting hadith, you were stopped. Sometimes you were flogged, sometimes you were imprisoned. You were prevented from narrating and recording authentic hadith. So this is 2. 3, teaching was not allowed. You could not stand before people and explain the tenets of religion. So-and-so is part of the usul al-din, or so-and-so is the aqidah. We believe in this. We believe Allah is so-and-so. We believe the hereafter is so-and-so. We believe the Quran is so-and-so. That is why Muslims 200 years later suffered so much, debating. We had people that were killed because they asked questions about the Quran. Is the Quran created? Did it have a time when it began? Or is the Quran everlasting? Is it associated with Allah Himself? Is it a part of Him in a way? And people died, imprisoned, flogged. Small wars broke out because of this. Why? Because teaching was prohibited after the death of the Prophet. Because nobody could stand and show people what real Islam was about. Not allowed. Anything but that. Imam Zain al-Abidin, when he stands before the people of Damascus in the court of Yazid and starts to recount some of the aspects of religion, what happens? Yazid says, enough. Where's the mu'adhin? Where's the person who recites adhan? Recite the adhan. The mu'adhin says, oh Amir, it is not the time for salah now. He says, wayhak, what was to you? If you do not recite the adhan, there will be nothing left over here. You know what this man is doing? This is what people were treating with religion. When Fatima al-Zahra in her speech after the attack on her house stands before the people and gives this most eloquent, most beautiful speech, and the tears and the wailing break out. She does not finish her speech, but one of the men, the most famous of the men sitting there, stands up and says, oh Fatima, you have made us all upset. We did not want to hurt you, and cuts off her speech. If she was allowed to carry on speaking, people would have found out what real Islam is about. So teaching was prevented during the lifetime of Imam Zain al-Abidin. This belief in Jabr and predestination I mentioned, this was very dangerous, because it meant that people could do something, could commit a crime and a sin, and say, not my fault. God wills it, God wants it. I became Khalifa because God wants me to be Khalifa. God commands that I kill you and imprison you and take your land and take your wealth and do so and so. This is what God wants. This was a dangerous ideology that almost gave a carte blanche, as they say, allowed the ruler to do what he wanted at the time. This was very dangerous. Cutting off the Imam or cutting off the Shia from the Imam. Imam Zain al-Abidin, his house was known. There were constantly spies stationed around that area so that people would monitor who was visiting the Imam, who were his companions, and they would be harassed all the time. Imam Zain al-Abidin never was left alone when he returned to Medina. Every single day, somebody had plans for the Imam, whether to abuse him, some of them even from, unfortunately, the Banu Hashim themselves, whether to attempt to assassinate him, whether to attempt to ridicule him, whether to attempt to make him look bad. Abdul Malik, when he was Khalifa, he went to Hajj the same time that Imam Zain al-Abidin was in Hajj. And Abdul Malik entered with all his men and was doing the tawaf. Imam Zain al-Abidin was doing the tawaf as well. Everybody did not dare to stand before Abdul Malik. So if they were doing the tawaf, they would make sure they stood behind him. They would not go ahead of Abdul Malik, Khalifa of the time. The only person that ignored him was Imam Zain al-Abidin. Abdul Malik said, who is this that dares to do his tawaf in front of me, to walk in front of me? They said, this is Ali ibn al-Hussein. Abdul Malik commanded that everybody stop the tawaf, and then commanded that the Imam be brought out of the tawaf, stopping him from doing the tawaf, and questioning him, why did you dare to stand before me? So even in the ibadah, even when they stood before Allah, they were not left alone. And by forcing the Imam to come out of tawaf, trying to show people around that I have more power than he does. Look, he's the Imam of the time, I have more power than he does. I have authority, he does not. This was the aim of Banu Umayyah. And financial punishment, taking anything of value from the Ahlul Bayt and their supporters, lands, wealth, endowments, anything that the Shia could use was taken away from them. Their homes were destroyed. They were accused of inciting rebellion. So they would be thrown out of their homes and they would be destroyed. Who's going to rebuild their homes? Where are they going to get the money to rebuild these? Harun al-Rashid, when he came to Medina one time, he met Imam Musa ibn Ja'far. He said, what can I do for you? In front of people to again show he's in a position of authority and the Imam is not. What can I do for you? Imam says to him, do not do anything for me, but give us some of your wealth so that we may distribute for our orphans to put something on their bodies, for our young men and women to marry from each other, for some of our poor people to have food, halal food to eat. This is what we are in need of. So financial punishment is something else that Banu Umayyah engaged in. And the belief that the Imam only focused on ibadah, as I said, we will address next time inshallah, but it was a tool. Focusing on ibadah was not a reaction. I am upset, I am hurt, I am bitter, so I will turn away and engage with Allah only. No. Turning to ibadah was a tool. If teaching was prevented, and lecturing and telling people a hadith from the Holy Prophet was prevented, and going out and telling people this is wrong, you're not allowed to do this, was prevented. What an excellent weapon to use. What an excellent innovation, an excellent idea. Nothing better than ibadah. If I can't teach and I can't stop people from doing things outside and I can't narrate hadith, I will show them ibadah. This is a way out. And the Imam used the ibadah as a tool. It wasn't a reaction because he was upset and in mourning. It was a tool that replaced these other means that were stopped. And likewise his teaching, which we will talk about next week, or next time we see each other. The teaching of the tabi'een, the school of the generation that followed the companions. Imam Zain al-Abidin taught every single one of them. These 7 that then taught numerous other people, the Imam himself taught them. If it were not for Imam Zain al-Abidin, they would not be the famous scholars that they became. And finally his akhlaq, the way he behaved with his companions, with the rest of the people and with his enemies. We shall see some of the stories of how Imam dealt with his own enemies, how he behaved with them. So inshallah, the take-home message from a short discussion here today is that we do not look at the life of Imam as something based on mourning and a bitter reaction at the tragedy of Karbala, that the Imam was an Imam, a broken man, upset, suffering. He was somebody who left this world only for us to remember him as somebody who cried all the time. Rather, there is much more to this. But we need to look at the life of the Imam, especially when we use the words political life, through the lens of the Imam itself. What is the Imam's priorities? What is his role? When we do this, then we can take into context their political actions and behaviors. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله محمد وآله الطاهرين.
Thank you very much. We now have some time for questions, if there are any. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for your talk. A question more from a methodological perspective. If you stand back, how you mentioned quite a lot that we have to be very careful when we look at history, primarily because many of the people who have written the history have an agenda in place. We often seem to see this, and we have evidence for it in a large number of cases against some of the things that have been said against our Imams. But at the same time, we often, do we sometimes overlook the opposite side of things, where from our perspective, from the Shia's perspective, there are people who make up things which may not seem ridiculous when we look at it now, but they help a reading of history that supports the Imam's point of view in a way that just because it sounds nice or it works well for us. And how much of what we, or the way that we read a historical event is very, very volatile and dependent on really a very, very shaky foundation in that respect sometimes. Even when it comes to, for example, Al-Kafi and places like that, we've got a large number coming from 6 or 7 of the companions of Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salam, and some of them, like even Zurara, some of the great companions, there are books written where there's some doubt placed on some of their on their weight. I'm not saying that there is this, but how much can we rely on this, and are we in danger sometimes of only looking reading history from our point of view more blindly than perhaps is fair?
Well, I began very early on in this discussion. I was critical of a Shia writer himself. So I did not attempt to only attack the historians from the other schools. I was critical of a Shia writer himself because I believe historians, whether they are Shia or non-Shia, have a responsibility. And unfortunately, I have yet to come across a historian who from beginning to end is completely truthful and, let's say, objective in his writings. No such thing. I have yet to see from the Shia or the non-Shia school. So I hope that answers immediately the general gist of your question, is that no historian from our school, from other schools, is completely and honestly objective and truthful in how he writes. This is a fact. Humans are fallible, they make mistakes, and we are humans, we have emotions. Historians, every single one of them has an agenda for writing a history. Nobody is told, here's £100,000, leave your full-time job, close your eyes, don't listen to anybody, go in a room and write history. No, people decide to write history because they have a name, they have an agenda. Shia or non-Shia, that's not for discussion. In terms of what you said regarding, in our books, you mentioned Al-Kafi, specifically you mentioned Zurar. The issue regarding some of the companions of the Imams, when we read in books that, for example, Zurara was so-and-so, or Hisham was so-and-so. Sometimes the Imam says that this companion of ours is not one of us anymore. I can say with absolute certainty, every single one of these narrations is true, and yet every single one of these narrations is either for taqiyya or to protect that companion's life. So when the Imam, for example, says Hisham is not one of us anymore, or Zurara has turned his back on Shia Islam, he's not a follower of the Ahlul Bayt, either for taqiyya or to protect that man's life. Do you know how Hisham ibn Hakam died? He died of fear, escaping from village to village, because he was sought after by Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. The Khalifa of the time put a bounty on his head. So Hisham ran away from village to village until he had a heart attack and died in fear. This was what the Imam was trying to achieve by saying Hisham is not one of us, to tell the Banu Abbas, leave him alone. He's not a threat to you. So inshallah, when we look at even these narrations, this is what I'm trying to say. We need to step back a little bit from the actual text and see, in a way, the context of this. Why was this written? What was the agenda here? What was the Imam aiming for?
Any more questions?
Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Okay, what is the purpose of life? Constantly I'm fighting that the Imam did this, Imam did that. What are we doing? All the Gaza, people in Palestine getting killed, Afghanistan, Iraq. Here, do we help the community, poor people, needy, elderly people? Girls need to be married, boys need to be married. Where is the unity? What am I doing? What you doing? What everybody's doing? Well, Imam showed to us. Quran says, what is the Muslim duty at the moment? What are we doing? How many years and centuries are we going to talk about it? Where are we getting at? We're getting crushed more. What is the answer from now on?
Alhamdulillah, you appreciate that this is outside the context of our discussion today. But if we look at, for example, the life of Imam Zain al-Abidin himself, put in such a difficult situation where he saw his father, his brothers, his uncles, companions of his father, best friends, people that he spent his whole life with, his aunts, his sisters crying, trampled to death, some of them, camps set on fire. Would he say the same thing? Would he say, what's the point? After this, after seeing Sayyid Shabab Ahlil Jannah beheaded in the battlefield, horses trampling on his body, after seeing this and hearing this, being there, do you think he would say, there's no point in life after this? I might. If my father was Sayyid Shabab Ahlil Jannah and I was there to see him killed in this way, why would I want to live after this? But
sorry, I didn't mean that. What I meant, we have to do, we've got the role model, we have got the Prophet, we've got the Quran, أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ, we've got the intellect, we've got to live. For me to talk, defend of Imam's life doesn't take me to paradise, doesn't produce Islam, doesn't establish Islam. You know what I'm trying to say? We are all here, but we're all fighting with one another. A group here, a group there. So that we will bury the Imam's knowledge. So we have to start acting. Do you know what I'm trying to say? That's what Imam did. He did his job, now I have to do my job.
You've answered your question, thank you. Excellent, thank you.
Are there any more questions? Okay, I think we'll end there. Thank you very much. Salawat.